Oh, whoa. Alright, so I've managed to complete it in sort of a rough form. There's a few things I'd kind of like to change, but I'm just going to chill out on it for now and let it, just be. I'm going to walk through kind of how it works so that you can know what I did and maybe get some ideas as to how to do similar things for yourself. So, working line by line, right at the top I import random, which is the Python package that allows me to use random and other randomization functions, which you'll see here. Random rand range is all from random. And then I set the global variable run to true, which I use to keep the while loop running, as well as exit it later. And then I print type quit to leave it at any time, which I'll just run this so you can see. Type quit to leave at any time. And then we get into the while loop. So while run is equal to true, which it is, it will do everything below it, up to here. This is outside of the loop, and that runs whenever the loop exits. So, at the very start of the loop, I set d equal to 1, which I'll explain a little later. That's to basically make sure that you can't choose 1 as the amount of sides on a dice, which would basically output an error, because that can't exist, can't be. And then it basically gets the user to decide a amount for how many dice, which I indicated was Q, quantity, how many dice to roll, and then they enter it in, which is basically going to output a string variable called Q, filled with whatever they put in there. And then for consistency's sake, I just lower case the string with the string subfunction called lower, and I operate that on Q. So Q is determined as the input, and then it turns everything that's in that into lowercase. So Q equals lowercase of Q. So once I have the lowercase version, I can very easily check to see if the first value in that is Q, which would basically guarantee that the person had typed in quit. And then if they type that in, the function breaks, or the loop breaks, which means that we basically instantly go right to here. That's the break right there. Otherwise, it will turn what else is in Q, or what is in Q right now, into an integer. So basically, as long as the first character isn't a Q, it'll turn the now lowercase string of Q into the integer of Q. So if the person entered quit, or quit, it would exit. But if they enter 25, there is no Q there. So it won't quit. What it'll do is it'll just turn this into that, so that you can actually work with it on mathematics and such. So now I've got my quantity integer, and then we get into kind of the more complicated part, which is actually determining how many sides of the dice, how many sides there are on the dice. So we start another while loop inside of the while loop itself that runs as long as d is equal to 1. And now d stands for dice, or like what type of dice you're using, so how many sides of dice. Sides are on the dice, I mean. So as you can remember, I set d to 1 at the very beginning of the while loop. That's basically to make sure that every single time that you make it to the end and you get your rolls printed out to you, like you can see here. That was kind of an accident, but oh well, stress testing the computer is always good. Basically, it just makes sure that no matter what you put in, so in this case I put in 6, that it'll reset the variable back to 1, so that once it gets to this loop, it'll run it, like no matter what, because at the beginning it set it to 1, at the beginning of this loop. So as long as we didn't exit this loop, this will run. And then at the beginning of that, it just sets d to 1 again, because in the event that we get something, an invalid response from this, you know, d set d equal to 1 so that this will always run. So that if you put something stupid in there, it'll be like, what? And then it'll set it back. I think. D equals input, d equals 1. See, I don't even know if that's actually valid, because if d is equal to 1, then it'll print 1 as an invalid number. But if I set d to r, anyways, I'll just explain what this is kind of for. I think that's useless, actually, but this isn't quite perfect. I can see there's going to be bugs going on, because if I do put something like an R in here, or even if I put an R into here, it's just going to go along and it's going to be like, okay, it's not Q, so I shouldn't break, so I should try to turn it into an integer, but I can't because it's not an integer. So I need some way to check if that's an integer without breaking the whole process. Same with this one. But regardless, the point of this is to basically make sure that you don't put in 1. So it'll start, and then it asks how many sides do you want? And then if you put 1 in, it'll just say that it's invalid, and it'll set d back to an integer. And then when it's set back to an integer, if it was 1, that would mean that the integer is now 1, and now d is equal to 1, so it'll run this loop again. So it'll just keep on running this until you put a valid number in, and then once that valid number is gotten, it'll leave it, and then it'll turn that number into a lowercase string, and then it'll check that string to see if the first letter is Q, same as we did above, to break and exit, and then otherwise it turns it into an integer. Okay, now here's the fun part. I determine roles. The variable roles is an empty range, or an empty list, I guess. And then for r, which just a random, you know, I don't really understand how for loops work. I need to do some more research on for loops. So for r in the range of Q, where Q is right here, we determine Q as the quantity. So how many dice do you want to roll? So within the range of, actually that's interesting. I wonder if that's, actually no, okay, that has to work. Let's just test it. How many dice to roll? I want to roll 5 dice, 5 sides, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Cool. So for some reason that works. Maybe it starts from 1 instead of 5. I'm not sure. Anyways, so R being rolls, it doesn't really matter what I put here. I could actually just change that to rolls. Or roll, or range. not range, range is a thing, rank, whatever, R, in range of Q, so that many times, 5 times, or whatever you put in. I is going to be equal to, I is just a random variable. This is defining a new variable. So it'll run X amount of times. First time it runs through, it creates I as a random number between 1 and D. So D is the number of sides on the dice. So we generate a random number between 1 and D, and then we append that number, I, to the end of the variable rolls. So rolls is empty, so it'll put it in the first slot. And then if there's if the range tells us to do it more than once, if it wants us to do it twice, it'll start again. And then it redetermines I as something different, and then adds that to the end. So at first we got 3, and then it created a new number, which is 4, and added it. Then it created a 1, and it added it, and then a 2, and then a 4. And then once that's done, and the range is all run through, it prints out this variable, which you can see there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. That's kind of how it works. Anytime that you break out of it, like I said, it takes you right here, and then it just prints thanks. And I'll show you how many dice to roll. I want to roll 6 six-sided dice. And now I want to leave. Thanks. So as you can see, I ran quit on the first line, how many dice to roll, which is like right here. It's like the second line of the while loop, or third line, I guess, technically, of the loop. And that manages to break out of it. It doesn't have to actually check D at all, and it never turns it into an integer. But now I guess there is this one bug that we need to test, and that is if I put in a value for D that is not a number and is not quit, what happens? See, int, it needs an integer with base 10 to turn it into an integer. Let's try this with the first one as well. Yeah, it requires an integer. So the next thing to work on is going to be figuring out how to confirm that the input given is a number, and if it isn't a number at all, then it has to be turned into a number. But at the same time, I have to allow the quit operation. So yeah, that's going to be a challenge, I'm sure, but I'll figure it out, and I'll once I have a kind of general idea of how to do it, I'll make a video showing how I do it. But until then, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and yeah, have a good day.